How do you find the percent of something? So, basically, we're going to assume that you have a calculator, much like this, off to the side, and we'll pull that out when we need it. Here's what you do. You ask yourself the question of, what is the percent of, whatever number that you're interested in? We're going to talk about an answer that's not rounded, and sometimes they'll say round to the nearest tenth, that sort of thing, and I'll show you how that goes. So always pay attention to your instructions and do what they want. The first step that you do though is you take your percent and you just turn it into a decimal. So we just move that decimal over 2 spots, and now that 15% is 0.15. The word of right here is referring to multiplication, and then the number that we're worried about, 15% of whatever the number is, you just slide that down. And so now you've set up a multiplication problem, and as soon as you get the answer to this problem, you can actually know the answer to what is 15% of 25, and it's 3.75. So here we go, 3.75. If they just want the answer, this is it right here. If they say round to the nearest tenth, well, that tenth is the 7, and this 5 would round that 7 up to an 8, and we would just round it to the nearest tenth, 3.8. Okay? And it's going to be the same for each one of these. It's just you've got to know how to take any percentage, and turn it into a decimal. This would be 0.06 because we moved it not once but always 2 times, and we've got to put that 0 in its placeholder. So it's just 0.06 times 105. And again, we just pull out the calculator. 0.06 times 105. 6.3 is the answer. This usually comes up as one of the questions too. Well, what do I do if it says round to the nearest tenth and here's my tenth? I mean, do I just round it to the nearest whole number? No. They want you to round it to the nearest tenth in this situation, and since it's only got a tenth as your last place value, you don't need to do anything to it. It's just sitting there. If you're rounding to the nearest tenth and it had more than one decimal spot, then obviously you need to round to the nearest tenth. But if you don't need to, you don't have to. In fact, if you try to do something fancy, you'll miss it. And what about this one? Has 105% as a decimal. We move it over 2 times, and it's 1.05 times 44 is our problem. And before I hit enter on this to get the answer, look, if I times anything by 1, it's going to be at least that number. If it's 1 point and it's a little bit bigger than 1, my answer should be a little bit bigger than 44. So let's see what we get. 46.2. Why is it bigger than 44? Because we're doing more than 100%, so it has to be bigger than the number itself. It's got to be 44 plus a little bit more on top. And again, since we don't have, now that we're talking about, hey, what if they said round to the nearest tenth? We would just keep it the same at 46.2. 3 more. Sometimes you'll have percentages that have a decimal place in them already. Again, you have to know how to set it up as a decimal. We would move it over 2 spots to the left. So 0.154 times 1,012. And even though this has decimals, it's not that big of a deal because, again, how hard is it to pick up a calculator and just take your time? I'm checking the problem with what's in my calculator as I go. See, I typed in the 4, but it didn't pop up there. So if I went through and I hit enter, I'd have the wrong answer because I didn't type in 1012.54. I typed in 0.5. So make sure that you check what you enter into your calculator. And there's the right answer, 155.93116. So if they just wanted the answer, this is the actual answer right here. But if they need us to round, they'll tell you what to round to. If it's the tenth, that means that this 3 is going to keep that 9 the same. And this is more of the situation where we would normally ask you to round, just basically to keep things nice and neat. 2 more problems. make it a decimal, and then just multiply. And there's nothing to round, so it would be the same if they had wanted it to the nearest tenth. Again, we move the decimal over to the left 2 times, always, to make it into a decimal from a percent.